our demographic is changing in this country also, that our birth rates are going up, and it has to do somewhat with immigration of people from countries, and this actually happens a lot. You notice that when people are immigrating from a country that has had real difficulties, whether it's difficulties in getting resources, that they tend to have more children. And it's not just a cultural thing, it's a biological thing. It's a biological thing insofar as if you come from an environment with low resources, the survivability of your children is lower. You have higher infant mortality. So it's a good idea to have more children. Even in this country, you know, in this country 100 years ago, infant mortality was way up. Kids were dying all the time, and families were having 5, 6, as many kids as they could, because many of those children didn't live past their 5th birthday. And if that's the case, if you want to reproduce and have viable offspring, you go towards this end of the spectrum. If you look at countries where their resources have gone way up over time, their birth rates have gone way down, like in Japan and in China and these other places. So it's interesting. It's interesting that not only do animals follow this, we do. We do. And sometimes it's uncomfortable to talk about ourselves as animals. But ultimately, we are bound by the same rules and the same forces of nature that all animals are. And I think looking at things like this gives us some perspective into our own behaviors and into why we do some of the things we do. It's important to me as a behavioral biologist to look at these things from an evolutionary standpoint and a biological standpoint, because it allows us to understand some of the mysteries of our own behavior. If we don't look at these behaviors and try to understand where do they come from, why do they exist, then if we don't really understand that, then we can start to blame people for things that aren't their fault. You see what I'm saying? If we don't understand the biology and the science behind things, it's very easy to say, oh, it's your fault that you act this way, or it's your fault that you're in this condition. Well, no, it's our biology. Much of what we do, in fact, I would say that most of what we do is driven by our own biology. And if you look at, in this country, we're talking about resources, in this country, the highest rate of obesity in the country is in this little town along the Mexican border. Has anybody heard about this? There's a little town on the Texas-Mexican border, and there's a group of people who live there who have the highest rate of obesity in the country. And it's interesting because these people originally were from these mountains in Mexico, and they lived up in a mountainous environment with very low resources. They lived in this area of very low resources for thousands of years. And what happened was they evolved, they adapted to low resource environments. They adapted to very, very low calorie diets. Now, that part of that population moved down from that mountain environment and is now living in the United States, where we have Burger King and McDonald's and lots of high calorie foods. And they are so well adapted to making efficient use of every calorie that they get that it just goes straight to storage. And that's not their fault, folks. It's not their fault, it's their biology. And what I told you about why we crave sugars and why we crave fats and why we crave big meals is because of our biology. It's because our ancestors had inconsistent meals coming in. So when we had the chance to capitalize on high-calorie meals, we want it. And we want it all. You know, we want that whole cake. Yeah, you were gonna say something.
I was just gonna say, is that what an ectomorph is?
An ectomorph.
Is that the opposite?
An ectomorph is a classification of a body type. And there are endomorphs and ectomorphs and mesomorphs. And they usually use that in describing human beings, whether they're very thin or they have a medium build or they have sort of a heavy build. those body types are just sort of generalizations of, you know, if, and you can, I'm probably a mesomorph, which is just sort of a middle body type. If I were very tall and thin, somebody might call me an ectomorph. If I were more stocky and heavy, you consider that an endomorph. Those are just 3 different classifications for body types.
Why doesn't our body type change over the centuries?
Why hasn't our body type changed over the century?
We have all this abundance now. Why doesn't over time it change
That
little by little we would get used to, biologically get used to the idea that we have all this stuff and we don't have to eat the whole cake?
well, well, in a way we are. In a way we are. But when we talk about selection, biological selection, we have to consider that if something's going to affect your reproductive success, it has to happen before you have a chance to mate. And let's say that this tendency to become obese in this Mexican-American population on the Texas border, if that condition or that propensity to gain calories and become obese, morbidly obese very quickly, prevented you from reproducing, then yes, then that population would readapt to a high-calorie diet. The problem is that it's whether it's a problem or not, but what happens is that if you can reproduce before whatever it is kills you, then there's no selection process that goes on. But selection does occur. It does occur. And the human body is changing. Our dimensions and our body types are quite a bit different than they were 100 years ago, 200 years ago, 1,000 years ago. We've changed. And we continue to change. The human being is still evolving. In fact, every animal that's in existence is evolving. It's in the state of evolving. Evolving doesn't necessarily mean getting better, by the way. Evolving just means to unfold, to change over time. And all animals, every living thing, changes over time. Now, most people think that evolution has something to do with getting better. It doesn't. It just means change. It's a neutral term. Evolution is a neutral term. It just means change over time. And I can prove it to you by telling you that about 99.99% of every species that ever existed on the planet is extinct. So if evolution was the process of getting better, it's clearly not. Because all animals evolve, but if most things go extinct, then evolution is just change over time. And you either change into something else or you disappear. Okay. That's what I wanted to tell you.